very much, Father Anthony, for inviting me here. I'm really excited to share with you the most powerful book in the world, a book that has shaped our societies in no other way, and has created a society that is humane and loving and caring on the whole. Of course, these days a lot of rot is set in, but anyhow, it has changed the way that the world thinks about other human beings. And it's a great book, and the book is the New Testament in particular. And I'm going to talk about the New Testament and how we can trust the New Testament, and how we can trust its history, and we can trust the text of the New Testament. So that's what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. So, and there are two important ancient manuscripts that have come from us from the sands of Egypt, which help us answer those two questions. In the 1800s, late 1800s, there was a couple of people from Oxford University, Grenfell and Hunt, who went digging in around Oxyrhynchus in Egypt, and they discovered heaps and heaps of fragments of the New Testament. We actually have one of those fragments at Macquarie University, and that's it there. It's very small, so don't laugh at it. It gets very sensitive about how small it is, but it's a finger, really a finger height and thickness of this part of the Acts of the Apostles. And it's the earliest fragment we have of this part of the Acts of the Apostles, dated in the 3rd century AD. The University of Milan has three more fingers that have attached in size that actually attached to this part. So it's actually larger, the full fragment, than this one here. But this is the one we've got at Macquarie. We asked the University of Milan if they would give us their bit so we could, put it all together. But they said no, theirs was bigger than ours, so they wanted ours, and we didn't give it to them. Anyhow, so to understand the importance of those fragments that we've found in Egypt, we need to know how books were produced, first of all, in the ancient world. Now, before the invention of the printing press in the 15th century AD, books had to be copied by hand. You had to get a scribe who will laboriously copy a book hand by hand. Now, and the other thing is that we don't have before the age of printing, we don't have any original books from the ancient world. None. They've all been lost to us. And so what we do have is copies of copies of copies. And you can see there on the screen, you've got the original in yellow, and then we have a number of blue dots, and they're all lost to us. All those copies have been lost to us for one reason or another, of all the ancient books. And then we have some few surviving copies that are in the red. And so what we do to work out what the original looked like, we have to look at the red ones and work out where mistakes have been made in the copying process, because, as you know, in any copying process, and a long copying process, mistakes are made, and so people sometimes skip a line or they skip a word and things like that. And that's true of all ancient manuscripts. And so giving the gap between the original and the first surviving copy is over 1,000 years in most cases of ancient books. So Plato wrote a number of books on philosophy, and the first surviving copy is about 1,000 years between the original that he wrote and the first surviving copy. Tacitus, a Roman historian, writing in about 100 AD, he's trying to get in the photograph there, so he's knocked out the 100. Very vain person, Tacitus. So he's wrote in 100 AD, and we have a 1,000-year gap between the first surviving copy and the original. Aristotle, we have again about a 1,000-year gap in regard to his writings. So that's the normal for ancient books written before the printing press. However, for the New Testament, the gap between the original writings and the first surviving copy is entirely different. And we can take comfort in that and assurance in that. The earliest surviving copies of the New Testament books were about, as we'll see, about 100 to 150 years between the original writing and the first surviving copy, which is a big difference, isn't it, between the 1,000-year gap. And the reason why we want to get as close as possible to the original manuscript is that fewer mistakes would be made between the original and the first surviving copy. Now we need to understand book production in Roman Egypt and the form as well. Generally, books were written in a scroll book format. There goes. It's right. Thank you. It wants to roll away because it contains a roll. That's a joke. So this is a roll. It's not a scroll. You roll the scroll. You scroll the roll, but not roll the scroll. So they're not Dead Sea. Have you heard of Dead Sea Scrolls? Yeah, they're Dead Sea rolls actually. That's a technical term, roll. So that was the usual form of the ancient book. It was written in a roll format. But with the New Testament books, they were written in a codex format. And you can see the codex format in that picture there, with leather coverings around them. And the codex format is the book as we know it today. It has pages. And the New Testament manuscripts were made in that codex format, not in the roll, for one reason or another. So, and the early Christians grabbed hold of this new form of book production, of pages rather than a roll, with great enthusiasm, and probably because it was easier to put more in a book form, so you could put the whole of the 4 Gospels in a book form, rather than you'd have to have a number of rolls for the Gospels, for instance. So the first book that I want to look at that we have found in Egypt is the Gospel of John. and that's a copy of one of the pages of the Gospel of John. That's what it looked like. That's its size, and it was written originally in the late 1st century, and this book that we have, which contains most of the Gospel of John, has been dated in the 2nd or very early 3rd century. So the distance between the original writing of the Gospel of John and this copy that we have in our hot little hands is about 170 years. So you can see the difference there between 1,000 years, most ancient books, and for the New Testament we have a piddling 170 years. So that's the Gospel of John. And the other one that I want to look at is PBD2, which contains most of the writings of the Apostle Paul, you know, the letters that he sent out to the various churches, and richly written in the 1st century, and the copy that we have is around about the 2nd or early 3rd century. So again, there's a distance between the original writings of the Apostle Paul and about 100, 200 years. So again, very close to the originals compared to all the other ancient books. So, and then we have this one here, which is a replica of Codex Sinaiticus. So those two were written on papyri, but this one, Codex Sinaiticus, was written on parchment, and it's dated around about 350 AD, again very close to the originals, and it contains the whole of the New Testament as well as a lot of the Old Testament as well. So it is the first really full Bible that we have. That's the earliest in history. So around about 350, again very close to the original writings. Now what we can do is that we can look at, say, Codex Sinaiticus. We can look at what the Gospels of John and the writings of Paul, and see where the differences have been are in the copying process, and then work out what the originals look like. We also have this one here. That's called the Lindisfarne Gospels, and it's written around about the 700s AD. It's in Latin, so again we can use Latin manuscripts of the New Testament as well as the Greek Greek of the New Testament as well. Thank you very much. And then here's another one. This one was produced in 875 AD, and it contains the Gospels of Luke and John, and it's on parchment as well. So there are a number of Greek manuscripts. So the textual history of the New Testament is very good. There are over 5,366 Greek manuscripts, because the New Testament was first of all written in Greek. The papyri that we find in Egypt, the New Testament papyri, is all written in Greek because of the settling of Greeks in Egypt. So over 5,366 Greek manuscripts we can look at, and work out where errors occurred. And in doing that, most of the errors are very minor indeed, very minor. 99.9% of the errors in the New Testament manuscripts are minor, and they do not affect the actual message of the New Testament at all. So the New Testament is the most highly documented book from the ancient world, and so we can take comfort in that what we read in the New Testament today, in our translation of English or Arabic or whatever, we can be assured that that's what the original writers were trying to convey about Jesus and about the gospel and his death and resurrection. So that brings us what about its history? Okay, if the text in the New Testament is good, and we can say that really the message hasn't changed at all, what about its history? Well, that brings us back to our Paul's letters, and in particular 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 3-8, which is this page here. Like that. 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3-8, which is found here in this manuscript of the Apostle Paul writing to the Corinthians, says this. He says, Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. He's recounting actually a creed, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, which is Peter, and then to the 12. And then after he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all he appeared to me. So that's what is written here. And if we could date this to about 150 AD. So Paul, and you've got to remember who is writing this. It's the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul began life as a Jew, and then he became a Pharisee. And he became an enemy of the Christians. So he was an enemy of the Christians until the Lord spoke to him and woke him up to the fact that Jesus had risen. And he was converted to Christianity. Instead of becoming one who was out to kill the Christians, he became one who himself died as a Christian because of his belief. So you can see this is the person who's writing this. He has seen the Lord, and he's not lying. He's not lying because of the history of him himself as being a Pharisee and then turning to Christianity because of Jesus appeared to him and told him to be a servant of him. So that gives us assurance that what Paul is saying here is true. And not only that, he also says, not only have I seen the risen Jesus, but the apostles have, and over 500 brothers who are still living. And so when Paul wrote this, that they could go out and check whether he was bonkers or not, or whether he was actually writing the truth about what he was saying, that Jesus had risen from the dead and that he was alive, and over 500 Christians had seen the risen Jesus. So So there's lots of witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus. We have the Apostle Paul, as I mentioned. We have Matthew writing in his Gospel, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, and the writer to the Hebrews, all mentioning the fact that Jesus had risen from the dead. And these people were writing from different places at different times to different people, different groups of people, all saying the one thing: Jesus died for our sins and he rose again from the dead. And then not only that, we have non-Christian witness to the risen Jesus and his death and resurrection. We have Pliny the Younger, who was writing around about 62 to 113 AD. He's the governor of Bithynia, and his correspondence in 106 AD with the Emperor Trajan says this: they asserted, however, that the sum and substance, he's talking about Christians, substance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn and sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to God. So he's a non-Christian writing about Jesus, and that the Christians worship Christ, the risen Christ, as a God. Tacitus, a Roman historian, writing early in the 2nd century AD, he says this: consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, that is Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. Again, another non-Christian. Then Lucian, another non-Christian, a 2nd century author who wrote in Greek, and he wrote, the Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. And so he goes on about the Christians. Celsus, who was an anti-Christian, wrote in about 180 AD a book against the Christians, and he accused Jesus of being a magician and a sorcerer, and is quoted as saying that Jesus was a mere man. So he knows about Jesus, he knows about the miracles that Jesus had done, and he seeks to discredit Jesus and to explain away the miracles rather than claim that they never occurred. And then Josephus, he was born in 37 AD around in Jerusalem, and he writes this. He's a Jewish person writing for the Romans, history. And he says, at this time there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous, and many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, and those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he appeared to them after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. So there's a non-Christian writing about Jesus, writing about his miracles, and that the disciples of him believed that he had risen from the dead. So there we have, if anyone says to you, Jesus is a myth, his death and resurrection is a fairy tale, you've got to say to them, no, history shows that Jesus lived and that he rose again from the dead, and we have good eyewitnesses to that effect. And we have non-Christians who are writing about Jesus and the belief that he died on the cross and that he rose again from the dead. And we have the New Testament, which it has good textual history, so that it wasn't changed over time. And we can put our trust in it. And that is why this book has had such a great and profound effect on society and on the world today. Because it is true in regard to what it says about Jesus and his death and resurrection. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Don. We're going to take some questions, so if you have questions, think about them like in a minute. So I just wanted to say, hands up. Dr. Don will answer the questions. Hands up if you heard in YouTube, TV, whatever, like school, that the Bible is not true, it's been changed, it's there's fake stuff in it, the Christians changed it, put your hands up, hands up, you've heard a lot. And this is, unfortunately, is a popular culture that tells us that, correct? I think the whole point of this is, it's myth. What they're saying is myth, okay? Sometimes the importance of this is to show that if you're not going to take Christianity seriously, then you can't do any other history. Do you get what I'm saying? So the stuff we learn about Caesar, the stuff that we learn about Alexander the Great, we can't take it seriously because we have 1,000 times more evidence for Jesus and for the Bible. All right, and this is evident. This is not Abuna said or someone Sayyidina said, or no. This is historical evidence that people study at university, and they use the exact same criteria for these texts as they do with the Bible. Okay, as you can see. So if you're not going to take any of this seriously, you can't take anything you do at school, any history that you do at school seriously. Okay, we should just cut all that off, all the history that we do at school. Do you see what I'm saying here? Okay, so our faith is not just because Abuna says, or it's not blind faith that we believe in Jesus and believe in the Bible. It's what faith based on evidence. Do you get what I'm saying? It's faith based on evidence, and that's what Christian faith is. It's not just blind faith where you just they told me this, mom and dad says it, or I think it's true. No, it's based on evidence. We have evidence that the Bible is true. Okay, you with me there? Okay. Why is this important? Because if the Bible is true, and Jesus, like I had in Corinthians, that Jesus rose from the dead, and died and rose from the dead, do I take the Bible seriously? Is that a call for me to take the Bible seriously? If we believe that basic, hard evidence that the Bible is true and that Jesus is God and he died and he rose from the dead, I really have to take the Bible seriously. I need to know what it's about. I need to apply it in my life. Do you see the consequences of this workshop? Okay, so this is the basic foundation for our life. So if this is true, if this is, I can 100% sure that it's true, then what? The next workshops are very important, because they're going to tell us about the journey through the New Testament, the Old Testament, and how I can apply it to my life. Do you see why we have this here? Now, if you have any questions, hands up so I can give you the microphone. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Yes?
So you said that we can tell non-Christians that Jesus was a real man, he died and he rose. But how do we explain to an atheist that he was the Son of God and he was God?
Good question, very good question. Dr. Tom.
Thank you, Father. And that's a good question, isn't it? And the way to explain that is to say that the witnesses to Jesus wrote about him as being the Son of God because they had spent time with him and heard from him and were taught by him. So that I think I'd go down that path. Yeah.
So I think, like Dr. Dan said, if this is true, Jesus in the Bible says that he is the Son of God. Yeah. And his disciples believed it, and he showed it through what? Yeah. His resurrection, correct?
Yeah, the resurrection.
Does anyone rise from the dead if he's not God? No. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? You have a question? Oh, sorry. Hands up, yeah? Yes?
I don't need the mic.
Yeah, you're loud enough.
I wanted to ask, because you said that with the New Testament there was about 150 years from the first copy to the original, and with most other historical manuscripts it's at least 1,000 years difference. What would you suggest was the cause of that? Is it because of that actually there were so many more copies of the New Testament that were produced as a result of the good news as compared to other manuscripts which weren't of as importance and therefore they weren't copied as often? So
Yes, but yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think it's because of the importance in the New Testament. Most of those, most of the other ancient books were preserved in monastic libraries, and the copying in monastic libraries. But the New Testament itself, because it was so popular at the beginning anyhow, was copied by scribes and all over the place, because people wanted to get their hands on a copy. Yeah.
And I think the number that you mentioned earlier, the 5,000 copies of the today, the New Testament, that's only in Greek.
That's the Greek.
That's only Greek, not counting Coptic, Armenian, Syriac, all these other languages. Okay, so this is only Greek. That 5,000. When you multiply that by the number of manuscripts, it's humongous.
Yeah.
One more question. I have time for one more question. Yes.
Sorry, what's the green plant?
No. Sorry.
This
Sorry,
one.
what's the green plant?
This.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I use this as a whip to get the children under control. No, it's actually the top. It's a plastic. It's plastic. It's supposed to be the top of the papyrus plant from which papyri was made. So yeah.
Well, it is a replica. I don't think it's a real papyrus. It's a plastic. But just it lives for for the second visit.
But that's papyri itself. A sheet of papyri looks like that.